So with Jaime Munguia's impressive victory last night against John Ryder, a lot of people are expecting a fight against Canelo Alvarez to likely happen next, to potentially happen next sometime in May, maybe in September, but there's a good opportunity, a very good chance that they end up fighting in 2024. And in this video, I'll be previewing and also breaking down, tentatively I should say, breaking down a potential fight between Jaime Munguia and Canelo Alvarez. Now, what makes this fight relatively fun and interesting is it's actually a Mexico versus Mexico fight, and it's actually full-on Mexican. It's not even Mexican-American. Both fighters have lived their whole lives in Mexico, and I feel it's not very often we see two full-blown Mexican fighters taking each other on, let alone it being a very solid elite fight. Now, obviously, there are very often two fighters from Mexico will fight each other, but it'll rarely be a very high-level, pound for pound or fringe pound for pound type of fight, and this is a fight that I genuinely think is a good matchup. However, I want to make it very clear right now and get it right out the way that I feel that this is not the fight that should happen next. This is not the fight that I want to see next for either fighter. First of all, Canelo Alvarez needs to fight David Benavidez. I don't know why that fight still hasn't happened. I don't know why Benavidez hasn't been given his shot. He deserves a fight against Canelo much more than Jaime Munguia. And I'll give Canelo Alvarez a lot of credit in this. When I say deserves a Canelo fight, yes, Canelo Alvarez is a hot commodity. He is the ace side against all of these opponents. He is basically a lottery ticket for a boxer, and he can change a fighter's life getting the opportunity to fight him. I give him that much credit. So when it comes to getting that massive opportunity and getting that massive payday and getting that huge super fight for a fighter, David Benavidez has earned it more than virtually anyone around Canelo Alvarez's weight class. I've seen some people mention a Jermall Charlo fight for Canelo Alvarez next. Jermall Charlo has done even less than Jaime Munguia, in my opinion. At least Jaime Munguia is fighting Derevyanchenko and John Ryder. What's Charlo done as of late? He fought Jose Benavidez? I mean, come on, guys. Jermall Charlo is not even in contention, in my opinion, or at least he shouldn't be. But when you look at Canelo Alvarez taking on Jaime Munguia, Munguia does not deserve it over David Benavidez, who was a top 4, top 5 fighter of the year candidate last year if his wins against Caleb Plant and Demetrius Andrade. He deserves that fight over Munguia. He's also a better fighter than Munguia, and I'd pick him to beat Munguia. Now that we've addressed that obvious fact, I want to continue talking about a fight with Jaime Munguia and Canelo Alvarez. Now, this would be a competitive fight. I think people need to understand this. I always felt that Canelo would beat Munguia, and I still do. And I've always been very comfortable with that pick, and I'm still virtually and relatively comfortable picking Canelo Alvarez to beat Jaime Munguia. But I do think stylistically, Jaime Munguia gives Canelo Alvarez some problems. I think Canelo could even struggle in this fight stylistically. And the reason that Canelo Alvarez could struggle against Munguia is for a few reasons. First of all, Canelo Alvarez does not have a high punch output. He does not throw a lot of punches in his bouts. Even in his wins, even in his dominant victories, he's not heavily outlanding his opponents. Even against Callum Smith, he heavily outlanded him, but he didn't heavily outthrow him. He didn't throw that many more shots than Callum. He's not a guy with a super high work rate in his entire career. He never has been, and I don't think he ever will be. Jaime Munguia has one of the best punch outputs in the sport. His punch output is very tremendous and very impressive, as well as his gas tank and endurance. Canelo Alvarez is a guy who takes rounds off. I'm not going to say he necessarily tires, but he definitely will go spurts of the fight where he doesn't do much in all of his fights. The Danny Jacobs fight, the first Triple G fight for sure, and the second one as well, in my opinion. Even the third one, the third Triple G fight, he gave us very little in the second half of that fight. He only won that fight off of the work he did in the first half of it. So when you look at Canelo Alvarez being a guy who doesn't have high punch output and a guy who takes rounds off, it could be a sign of disaster when fighting someone like Jaime Munguia, who's constantly throwing punches and very active and not letting his opponents rest. If Canelo Alvarez rests against Munguia, takes a couple rounds off, he's going to lose those rounds for sure. Now, where my concern comes with Jaime Munguia and possibly picking him to beat Canelo Alvarez, I feel that Jaime Munguia's defense is horrible. I think he has probably one of the worst defenses in all of boxing. His defense is really bad. It's really poor. He gets hit flush in all of his fights. Even against John Ryder, in a very dominant victory, he got hit by a lot of clean flush shots that, if landed by someone like Canelo, could have been a very big issue, could have been a very big concern for Jaime Munguia. His defense is very bad, and the reason his defense is so bad is because he throws so many punches and opens himself up so much in these bouts. Jaime Munguia is very vulnerable to getting countered and hit by big shots, and that's why I would pick Canelo Alvarez to beat him. I don't think Canelo Alvarez would be able to do too much in the early rounds. I think he'd get outworked for a lot of those rounds as well and lose a lot of rounds in the fight. But I do think eventually Canelo Alvarez will start to break down Munguia, land the cleaner, crisper shots, and outbox him. Who knows, maybe even put him away in the later rounds. I do think this would be a fun fight, though. I do think it would be a competitive one. I think Jaime Munguia is one of Canelo Alvarez's better wins as of late due to the fact that he is an undefeated, I would say now he's basically heading into his prime now, undefeated, hungry contender. He's extremely hungry, extremely poised. He wants to be a top-tier fighter. Yes, he isn't taking on the guys we want to see him fight, even against John Ryder. That's not the fight we wanted. Jaime Munguia has been moved very, very carefully in his career. If you look at the way Oscar's been managing him and the fights that have been made, this guy's been fighting very similar level of competition for years now. I mean, when he beat Saddam Ali and Liam Smith, those are arguably some of his best wins, and those wins were years ago. What was that, 2016, 2017, those fights got made? I mean, I know the Saddam Ali fight and the Liam Smith fight, I believe, were both on HBO, when HBO was still a thing. Munguia's been young for a very long time. He's still a young fighter, but he needs to be moved a little quicker and a little better because his competition has been very poor in his career. Now, it's gotten a little better as of late. Derevyanchenko, even though Derevyanchenko's never won a big fight on paper, he is a tough name and a good win. And when you look at his last bout against John Ryder, yes, John Ryder's another guy who's never won a big fight in his career, coincidentally, even though he did win the Jacobs fight, technically, but many felt he got robbed against Callum, including myself. He has given a lot of top-tier opponents good fights, including Canelo Alvarez. The John Ryder win was a good win for Munguia. He did what he had to do, but again, at this point in Munguia's career, he needs to be fighting better guys, and I think the Canelo Alvarez fight is very likely to happen next, which I do think is still a shame because it should be David Benavidez, but I know what they're going to do. They're going to say, oh, we'll fight Munguia in May and then fight Benavidez in September. I mean, if you guys pay attention to Canelo Alvarez's career, if you look at the pattern of his career, his best fights, whenever he fights twice a year, the tougher fight is always the fight in September or the fight in the second half of the year. Obviously 2019 he fought in November against Kovalev, not September, but his tougher fight is usually the second fight of the year. He usually has a little warm up in May, and then he has a tough fight in September. I mean, we saw that even last year when he fought John Ryder in May, and then he fought Jermell in September. I know technically Jermell Charlo is moving up in weight, whatever, but that was the bigger fight for Canelo. No one really cared about the John Ryder fight. When you look at previous years, he would fight Danny Jacobs in May and then Kovalev later in the year. He'd fight Billy Joe Saunders in May and then Caleb Plant in September. He would fight the better name in September. So I'm expecting him to continue that pattern. He's going to fight an easier opponent in May, which is Munguia, and then fight the tougher opponent in September and Benavidez. However, I think that's slightly wishful thinking. I think there's a good chance that Munguia isn't even going to be next, and he'll probably fight Munguia in September. I don't think Canelo Alvarez wants that Benavidez fight. There's a good chance it'll never happen. But when it comes to Canelo and Jaime Munguia, it's a good fight. I hope it happens. I think it'll be very competitive. I think Munguia has earned his right to a big fight. I don't think he's deserves or has earned his way to a Canelo Alvarez fight, but I do think he does deserve a big matchup of some sorts. Maybe Munguia versus Jermell Charlo, maybe Munguia versus David Benavidez, and let the winner fight Canelo in September. There's a lot of fights that can be made, but you guys let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you see Canelo Alvarez versus Jaime Munguia fight playing out? What do you think of Munguia's performance against John Ryder? Tell me that good stuff. Have a good one, guys. God bless. Tell me your predictions down below. I'll see you guys later. Peace.